Hey, everybody, welcome once again. Deer Talk Now podcast is live and in action. Great week this week we're having, and a great guest, a dear friend of mine for more than, I'm trying to add it up. I first met him in person in 1995, so it's 27 years. Greg Miller, the legendary buck hunter from northern Wisconsin. Near and dear to my heart, he grew up hunting in the North Woods and taught so many people how to hunt big bucks. TV star, book author, author of thousands of magazine articles. Greg, welcome to the show. Glad to have you on, buddy.
Well, it's a pleasure, and it's good to talk to you again, my friend.
Absolutely. We've got so much to go through today, but one thing that I've been telling people is we're doing different approach to podcasts. We're not going to be on for 3 hours. We're going to keep this short, and it's like we're at deer camp. So what's going on with you, Greg? I know that you've been doing so many different things over the years, but what are you doing right now at this moment?
Believe it or not, kind of contemplating retirement a little bit. I've slowed down dramatically. We folded up our TV show, me and my son, a couple years ago, and my son Jake is now working for Springfield Armory in Illinois. Got a great job offer there and couldn't turn down. And I was filming some hunts, 4 or 5 hunts a year for North American Whitetail TV, and I'm back doing some writing. And all those years where I was chasing whitetails with a cameraman behind me and doing that, I accrued a lot more knowledge about whitetail deer and different habitats, and now I want to share that via the written word, I guess is what I'm getting at.
And
so
we're really looking forward to it.
That's what I'm doing.
We're really looking forward to it. I know we ran a piece here just a couple of years ago when you started getting back into it. I know that you originally started writing for North American Whitetail. This is back in the 80s. You wrote for Deer and Deer Hunting for many, many years. Even when I first started here, I remember all the articles and then the books. Now, if you're not familiar with Greg, you really need to do a Google search here. But as far as Greg's articles, there's thousands of them. I can never list all those. But his books, I think he's done 5. I was fortunate to be able to work on some of these. We published them at what was then called Krause Publications, which owned Deer and Deer Hunting for a while back in the 90s and the 2000s. Rubline Secrets was his landmark book. Aggressive Whitetail Hunting, Whitetail Adventures, Proven Whitetail Tactics, and one of my favorites, Bow Hunting Forests and Deep Woods, because like I said, that's how I started out hunting. And also, Greg was a pioneer when it came to television and video, and he was on Realtree's Monster Bucks. If anybody remembers the VHS videos, extraordinarily popular. Greg, the first question I want to ask you is, I know you so well that a lot of this stuff for me is just common knowledge, but what people don't understand is your background in hunting. Could you go through a little bit of how you started, what type of hunting did you do, and how it took place?
Well, I started tagging along with my dad way back when I was 4 and 5 years old, when they ran fox. There were a lot of fox back in those days, and my Uncle Clayton had some hounds, and so I started tagging along with my dad, and then later on, I was always enamored with. My dad was part of a deer hunting group that owned a cabin in 40 acres in Burnett County, northern Burnett County, Wisconsin. It was big woods. And I remember starting hunting with my dad when I was 12 years old, and I had a Model 94 Winchester in 32 special caliber, and ended up killing we had a party permit that year. You had to have a party permit to kill an antlerless deer, and I shot my first deer when I was 12 years old.
So this would have been like woods. Early 60s?
1964, I believe it was.
Sure.
Yeah, 64. And it just whet my appetite for more. But I also remember, and I'm not going to lie to you, I'm going to tell you the God's honest truth here, being so intimidated, and to the point of my dad would put me on a stand, which meant standing on the ground, scraping all the leaves away and standing next to a big tree and waiting for deer. And then he'd walk away. And once he got out of sight, man, there was a bear behind every other tree. There was a wolf behind every other tree. You know what I mean? I was scared to death. It was so intimidating, that country. And I'd listened to stories by some of the older hunters in the deer camp at night. And you never knew what you were going to see or when it might happen. But I eventually got over that, and then just absolutely fell in love with that big woods country. And I think, Dan, to be honest with you, that's probably was a huge asset to me, was eventually figuring out how to hunt that country. And then once I was able to figure things out up there, farmland, which was much smaller blocks of cover and much smaller woods, it seemed to be much easier, to figure it out down here. And plus the deer were visible here in the farm country. So it was a progression, but I did a tour of duty in the Air Force, 1970 through 74. And just all I could think about was getting back here and getting into deer hunting. And that's when it first started to become popular, was mid to late 70s. And I just got in it, at the right time, I think. Got interested in it, but I was serious about it and very dedicated long before a lot of other people. And where I devoted as much free time as possible to it. And it paid off in the end. I never thought that it would, but because I was doing it for personal enjoyment. But here I am, all these years later, and I look back on these books. As you're naming them, I got them on a bookshelf here in our living room, and I'm thinking, man, that's a lot of words to put on paper. 5 books, and I think I've co-authored close to 24 others.
Wow!
So I guess that was pretty prolific, yeah.
Oh, you were prolific. I remember those days very well. But one thing that people Greg doesn't broadcast this, and I hope it's okay that I say it, but Greg served in Vietnam. I would say thank you for your service, but I'd more like to say thank you for your sacrifice, because anybody who's been overseas, especially Vietnam, I know that was experience that I can't say anything about. I didn't experience it. But Greg served in Vietnam. He came back. And one thing that I've always said when people have asked me, there was always that skepticism. Greg did all sorts of seminar speaking at various deer and turkey expos, and his big thing was rub lines and hunting rub lines in the big woods. And a lot of people from other parts of the country could not comprehend that. And they say, is that legit? And I'm like, this dude lived in the woods. How was that, Greg? How were you able, when you got back here and you started deer hunting, the big woods? I grew up hunting Bayfield County, Chequamegon National Forest, which was just darn near impossible. How did you put those pieces together and start targeting mature bucks based off of that sign that they were laying down?
That's a very good question, and it's what I did was I thought, I'm not doing anything in the spring. And before, I was seasonal construction worker. I poured concrete, and so we were laid off through the winter months, and probably didn't get started until late April and sometimes around the 1st of May for our working season. And I thought, I don't get enough time in the fall to really explore the big woods. You get up there and you want to do some scouting, but you better be sitting on a tree stand or hunting as much as possible. So I started going up doing postseason scouting in December, and nobody was doing it back then. This is like the mid 80s or so. And I thought, and we were learning so much. And by we, I mean, there was 2 guys I hunted with up there and my brother Jeff, and we'd go in the woods shortly after daylight in the morning and walk, provided the snow wasn't too deep, and just walk to learn the country up there. And that's where I first started getting onto the rub line thing and realizing that these big deer were leaving pretty definite indicators of where they most preferred to travel in that big woods. And what I discovered, or we discovered, and remember now, this is back before Google Earth or anything. So you walked in, you better have a compass. If you didn't know where you were going, you better have a compass. And we used topographic maps mostly. And we'd find pinch points. And what we discovered, Dan, eventually was there is a ton of country up there, roadless cover, but deer use only certain parts of that. So it was more a process of eliminating bad country or unproductive areas, and as it was finding the travel routes that the bucks most preferred to use. And, it was amazing how much walking we'd do, and you'd be walking and finding nothing. And then all of a sudden you'd find we said, oh man, this is a gold mine. This is where they're hanging out. And so it started with postseason scouting, and then when the snow got too deep where we couldn't get around, we'd wait. And as soon as the snow melted, we'd be back up there. And then eventually that led to shed antler hunting. And gosh, by the late 80s, we had a collection of shed antlers. And that's another thing. Not a lot of people were doing that back then yet. And we really got the jump on that. And I mean, I still got a heck of a collection of sheds that we picked up over the years. So it was a matter of, investigating the country, finding out which areas could be productive, and then what was there via the shed antlers. You find the shed antlers and go, well, this buck made it. He didn't shed his antlers until after the gun season, so he's probably still alive. And he's going to be in that same area again the next hunting season. He is. So there was a lot of legwork and dedication and time.
That was. There's two things that you taught me. Because I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but I was greener than green, hunting like I said, the northern forest, and you always told me look for wrinkles in that topography because, like you said, we didn't have the internet. We basically had topo maps, or if you were lucky or you had enough money, you would send out and get some aerial photos. But you would say look for wrinkles in that topography and then learn how the deer used it. That was number one. And the other thing, I actually wrote this down before our interview here. You might have wrote an article about this once, but I remember you saying scout until it hurts. And that's one thing that I always took to heart when I hunted up there. I don't hunt up there anymore, but when I hunted up there, it was like you really got to learn that land. And I know you like turkey hunting. Once I started going turkey hunting in the South and southern states, those guys, same tactics for turkey hunting. They said, you have to know that land. You have to know the different features because you're not going to be able to pick it out from a map or a photo. You have to be able to scout and really know that land well before you can really start figuring out what deer are doing on it.
Exactly. You hit the nail right on the head. And without all the perks that we have now, and as it applies to hunting, and especially the scouting cameras now, we had none of that. And I don't know if the listeners can grasp that. We couldn't just go out and pop up a camera and then come back and check it and go, okay, here's what's going on here. Like you can nowadays, and you can accomplish what we were trying to do in the off season. You can pretty much do in a day or two or three here or during the season now with cameras and all the other bells and whistles we've got for deer hunting. But, and that's not to demean that. I use cameras and
right.
I use all the modern bells and whistles for sure. But, it was just a totally different game. It was a totally different game back then. And, you had to be dedicated. I mean, I know people say my dedication and my spirit for deer hunting was, unusual, but it wasn't really. I mean, we knew other really good hunters that hunted that area in northern Wisconsin, and they were the guys that were, as successful as we were, and because they were doing the same things. They didn't write about it. They probably didn't even talk about it. They just did it.
There was always locals like that where we hunted. You would have never known those guys were big buck hunters unless you got to go in their cabin during gun season. And you went in there and there was
right.
rack after rack, not mounts, rack after rack of giant bucks, either nailed or screwed to the walls or in the barn or something like that. Can somebody today, in your opinion, what is and now, we're both Wisconsin boys, but this applies throughout so many states. It could be even out west, northeast, wherever. Can somebody still have that kind of success in that big woods environment?
Oh boy, it's I think so. We have variables now that were pretty much non-existent back in the 70s and 80s, and the biggest factor right now, I think, in that big woods is wolves, and they were pretty much eliminated from the landscape by design at one time. And they have I stay in touch with the people. I don't hunt the big woods anymore and haven't for a few years, but I stay in touch with, there's a whole group of people from this area that, hunt up there yet. Several different groups. They got cabins up in that area. And the wolves have changed the dynamic more than anything right now. The logging, yeah, that can be kind of a factor, but, but in my opinion, right now, the wolves are the biggest X factor of how the landscape has changed up there, Dan. I really do. It's predation. And, I go back up there once in a while and just drive around. And it's amazing, too, how areas that were remote, they've been logged. And, when they log, they punch in logging roads. And then they, the county or whoever it is that logs it, once they've logged it, they've turned around and put a lot of it up for sale.
Right.
So, and now I drive the roads where we had miles and miles of roadless cover. I kid you not. And you know what that country's like. And now I drive around those blocks. Oh, there's a cabin. Oh, there's a house. Oh, there's another cabin. And it's amazing how that area up there that was so remote and desolate now is populated. So, so that's changed it a lot, and
totally transformed it. And some of those people now, what we found out was they don't even hunt. Some don't. And so you have a combination of that. I think the logging is a big one because you had that boom in the 40s and the 50s that brought us those great regrowth forests for those deer populations that you got to hunt in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and into the 90s even. But like you said, no wolves. Now, we could that could be a topic for another day that we could talk about, because my thoughts on it are the same as yours. Our deal with the feds was 250 wolves, while we've got more than 5 or 6 times that now, if not more than that, and it's completely changed. Not just deer, not just wolves killing deer, but wolves displacing deer in what would have been normally prime deer habitat. Man. Okay, we're going to take a quick break to thank one of our sponsors. Today's episode of Deer Talk Now podcast is brought to you by Muddy Outdoors and the new Merge cellular trail camera. Featuring simple, easy-to-use cellular activation with quick scan QR setup, the Merge Cell Cam features 26 megapixels, updated ultra-fast trigger speeds, 4 image resolutions, 80-foot detection and IR range, burst mode, and an SD card slot that takes up to 32 gigabyte cards. It operates on 8 AA batteries and has an external power jack for solar battery pack that's sold separately. Check them out at your local sporting goods retailer or visit gomuddy.com.
We could go on about the wolf thing, and I will tell you this, that when we had the Wisconsin wolf season a year ago, and we reached the quota in 48 hours, what does that tell you?
Oh my gosh!
Not that we're a bunch of great wolf. Our group, we still had our hound hunting group. We were hunting right here in Chippewa County, Wisconsin, and our group, we had I think 2 or 3 more tags to fill. We filled 3 or 4 of the tags, but and that was in a day and a half. So, but to getting back to, because I don't want to stay on the wolf thing too long, but northern Wisconsin to northwest Wisconsin, another big factor, huge factor, is the trails that they punched in, and now everything that's accessible by an ATV, there's going to be ATV traffic.
Right.
It's an epidemic, and I have nothing against it other than I'm a deer hunter and I don't have an ATV and I don't do that, but I can see where it could be a lot of fun. And it's unbelievable where there are ATV trails now. And even if there isn't one, somebody will find a way to get an ATV into an area if they want to go in there bad enough.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, Greg. It's not just about
sure.
ATVs, accessibility, but how, in your view, how does ATV traffic in general affect deer behavior, especially big buck behavior?
Well, I think that the deer, whitetails they're just a cool animal, and they're so amazing because they're so quick to pick up on. And I've written about this and I've talked about it in seminars, and it's amazing how they're able to pick out spots that very quickly that they know they're not going to get pressured. They're not going to have a confrontation with a human or a predator. And so when you get the ATV traffic or even hunting pressure in a certain area, the deer are going to do what they have to do to get away from that pressure or that disturbance of an ATV or multiple ATVs. So, and you just never know where that's going to be. It's changed the whole, like I said, the whole dynamic of the sport, I think. Apex predators and ATV, UTVs, whatever. But then again, it is what it is. It is what it is.
It is what it is, and you have to deal with it. Now, you weren't dealing with it too much. Now, correct me if I got my year wrong here. I believe it was 1991 when you killed that giant non-typical.
Yep.
Was that right?
Yep. He was the number 4 non-typical archery kill in the state of Wisconsin at the time I shot him.
Wow.
I still have a copy of the record book from back then, and he was number 4, and that was a local deer. That wasn't even a big woods deer. That was in Eau Claire County, but that was because my sister was married to a guy who owned a bunch of property south of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, just out of the city limits. And and it was bow hunting only. That area was archery only. So the deer had an opportunity to grow up and reach maturity. But that being said, he managed to get to 5 or 6 years of age. There was still plenty of hunting pressure, but he had found a way to, make it to 5 or 6.
What did that buck score again?
He was 202 and 5/8 gross, and he's 193 and 7/8, I think, net.
That's the one I remember.
So he's got 17.
That classic photo of you holding him, I think you're wearing your real tree. It was just one heck of that had to be one heck of a memory for you, obviously.
Yeah, well, especially late season, I was just out there to kill the deer. We knew this deer was around. We didn't know anything about how he was. We had rubs on that piece of property. I think it was a couple 100 acres. It was big as or big around. Some of them were on trees as big around as my thigh.
Yep.
And so we knew there was a really good deer in that area. But interestingly, Dan, after I shot him, I bet you I talked to probably a half a dozen people over the years after that. One of them was even, this was back when I was pouring concrete for a living. I was a finisher, and one of our ready mix drivers came up to me and said, "Greg, do you happen to have a picture of that deer that you shot?" It was a couple years later. I said, "I do. I just happen to have one in my wallet." I said, "Here he is." And he said, "I had that deer on my property." He said, "I hunted him and he was like 1.5 miles or 2 miles east of where our property was."
Wow.
And I said, "So you had eyes on him?" And he said, "I saw him several times." Because again, this was back before scouting cameras.
Before cameras. I mean, that was something else.
Yeah. And it was one of those days where I just knew I had to be in a tree stand because it was there was a forecast for 5 to 7 inches of snow later that night, and I thought, boy, these deer they're going to be moving early, putting the feed bag on because they know when that stuff's coming. And I had 4 or 5 does come out in front of me in this alfalfa field that had just a little bit of snow on it, and then I heard another deer coming, and I saw these does just start looking up in the woods, up in this little bluff. And this deer came walking out, and I'm like, oh, my God. And then my next thought was, don't mess this up.
How far was
he ended up,
how far was
I think
the
I
shot?
shot him like 15 yards, 17 yards,
gosh,
something like that. It wasn't 20. Yeah, I know, right? But I had him there for minutes feeding, on the alfalfa, but he was always at a bad angle. And finally he turned and gave me a perfect quarter and away shot and put his head down to eat, and game, set, match.
Perfect. That photo of that buck, and then the other photo, I wish I had it. But anyways, the other photo I remember vividly of you with a big deer, I think was maybe the early 80s. And I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's a picture of you standing looking at this giant buck on a meat pole, and I think it's your best friend standing there next there with you. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
That was the Squirrel Hill buck. We had an area that I hunted in Burnett County up in the Big Woods that actually I found it. Myself and a friend of mine who lived up there, we bear hunt together. And that's back when you can just buy a bear tag over the counter.
Yep.
And so we were baiting bear in there in August, and I was walking in one day, and I walked in on this old logging trail, and I was on my way to the bait to put fresh bait in, and I came over a little bit of a rise, and then there was a low spot in front of me, and there was usually water on the logging road and a couple of tire ruts there, and there's a deer drinking in out of those tire ruts, and he picked his head up and he was kind of facing away from me, and I got one look at him and went, holy cow, that's a good deer. Long story short, I ended up hunting that area fairly hard, and I ended up walking back, and it was pretty much poplar and birch, and I walked back, and I just following a deer trail, a good deer trail one day, doing some scouting, probably in late September, early October, and I found an oak ridge, and these oak trees were hemorrhaging acorns, and there was deer sign in there like you wouldn't believe. So put up a tree stand, and I shot that deer, I think on the morning of November 1st or 2nd. He had a field dress weight of 217 pounds. That deer.
Wow, that was a big buck.
Big 8-point, yeah. And his neck was 30 inches, like not too far behind his ears. We measured his neck, and it was 30 inches.
That would have been like my
he's a bull.
Waist like maybe 50 years ago, but maybe your waist right now, because you've always kept yourself in good shape. But that I just remember that was
it would be right now.
That was a heck
bout
of
with COVID. My wife and I.
That's right. You guys had a bout with that. Now I know that you okay. So we talked a lot about that big woods hunting, but then there was that part of your career when you were making TV shows and you were doing a lot more writing and you're traveling around. I know you've hunted Illinois, Wyoming, South Dakota, Saskatchewan. How did maybe just tell the listeners a little bit about that whole journey, because I know it lasted for decades. And you were hunting other places and learning how to kill mature bucks in places where you weren't familiar with them.
It's absolutely, with hands down, without doubt, and I've told many people this, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life, other than marriage and my kids. But from a hunting standpoint, it was, for a guy like me that my whole gig was, and in most instances now, even though we were hunting out of state, sometimes they were outfitted hunts, and most times though, we were doing it on our own. And even a lot of the outfitters and people I hunted with over the years, they would allow me to just do my own thing, which was great. And it opened my eyes to figuring out how to take mature bucks on country that was so diverse. It was so different, like Oklahoma, with the red clay and beautiful, beautiful area we hunted. Drive all the way down there, 14, 15-hour drive and kill deer. I mean, just 5 or 6 days we'd get it done. And in the end, I think I wrote them all down here a while ago. I think I hunted 23 states, and I ended up killing deer in 17 of them.
Wow.
So I don't know if there's a whole bunch of people that can, and I'm not saying it to toot my horn, but right. I don't know that there are a whole bunch of people that can make that same claim. That's a lot of miles, and I look back on it, Dan. I honestly don't know how I did it. I don't know, but that's from a standpoint of a guy who's gotten old and tired.
Well, what would that advice be? I'm getting tired, and I got a couple of years that I should be not being tired. But if you had to give advice now to younger hunters who say, yeah, that must be awesome to hunt on TV, have your own TV show, or what would your advice be to some of those, especially younger hunters that are aspiring to be the next Greg Miller?
Well, I say go for it. There's, you need to talk to somebody who has had a lot of experience in that. And, it would take a whole nother podcast to talk about that,
Sure.
What they should look out for, how to get started. Anymore, the equipment, like even the production equipment and the cameras, back when I got started, everything was very expensive because
Right.
It was such a finite, you know what I mean?
Yep.
There wasn't the options that to explore. Now with the internet, I mean, and you can be a star in like overnight. And
on social media.
It's all about hits. Huh?
A lot of kids
Yep,
are doing
yep.
this with their phones now and videotaping and things like that. But do you still think that's a viable aspiration for somebody to, or like I grew up the same way you did. I grew up in construction with my dad and my brothers. My dad said, you better go to school if you don't actually want to work for a living. That's what he always said. He said, if you want to work for a living, you can do that, and it's going to be hard labor, or you can figure something.
Yeah.
You can figure something else out, and that's what I've always told students is that take as much math and science as you can right now, because this might not be the thing that you're going to be able to do.
It's changed so much, Dan. Is it? Can people realize their aspirations? Yeah. But it's a whole different entity. We had Outdoor Channel, and I don't even think Sportsman was just getting started then. And we had ESPN 2 aired a few outdoor shows on Saturday morning, I think.
Yep.
And otherwise
videos.
You produced videos.
Yeah.
And now there are so many outlets for gaining recognition. But I will tell you this, that when I started doing it, and I was not a pioneer, it had been going a while when I, started doing my own thing and not just being on other people's shows. We would have to raise over $500,000 just to get going. When you figure air costs, and network TV is expensive. And I know you know that too.
Yep.
It is expensive to air a television show on an outdoor network. And I think that's done nothing but go up. And you paid it. People were under the impression, standing in a booth at deer shows, you get to talk to literally hundreds of people every deer show. A lot of people were under the impression that we were getting paid by the network to bring them a finished show. And it didn't work that way.
Right.
You had to buy airtime, just like any TV show. And that's the reasons for sponsors. And I was doing all the marketing for our show. And I remember thinking, I don't know how long I can do this. It was some of the most stressful years of my life was trying to raise enough money so that we could air our TV show the next year. And I'm talking over $500,000 to bring in to pay our air costs, pay our expenses, and I was doing it to make a living, but it it was a lot of hard work, Dan. And there, that part of it, that aspect of it is still out there.
Yep.
Outdoor Channel's still going strong. Sportsman's Channel's going strong. But there's just so many other outlets for good deer hunting footage.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool in a way.
One of my favorite stories, I don't know if you remember this, but it was over at Tom Inderbo's in Buffalo County. You were there with Jake. Jake was, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years old, and a young, aspiring videographer was there, and he had just bought his new Sony Handycam. That was Pat Reeve. He was a taxidermist by trade, a guide on the weekends, and we were sitting there, and I just remember sitting Tom's kitchen. Tom's sitting there with this Sony Handycam instruction book. He's got his reading glasses on, and they're trying to read this booklet on how to use that thing. And I just can't get over what has transpired in the 25 years since then. Pat's a movie star with Nicole, and the equipment. I just thought about that when you talk about the technology. I mean, back in those days, those beta cams were like, it's like carrying an anvil around with you, and I never wanted to carry one, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Everything has changed. People are shooting stuff with their phones now, and it's just a totally different ball game.
Yeah, I got a big Sony, that one of the first production cameras that we bought. It's down in the basement. It's for sale if you want to buy it.
Well, I don't need a boat anchor, so if I'm shopping for a boat anchor this spring, I might hit you up on that.
Well, a lot of it is just, I watch some of these outdoor shows, and every once in a while they'll have a remote camera filming the cameraman and the hunter. And it's kind of cool. I like that. It's kind of like a behind the scenes camera. They have a little, who knows, anyway. And I'm seeing a lot more DSLRs now with big lenses on them, or, adequate lenses. They're not even shooting. They're just using a DSLR, like our old 35 millimeter cameras. It's amazing what's happened in those things. The quality is amazing, and it's good enough. I mean, if it's good enough for production TV, it's pretty darn good.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's light speed ahead. Couple more questions for you here, Greg. How much hunting do you do today, and how do you keep that fire burning for deer hunting after been doing it for so long and killing so many big bucks over the years?
Well, I still have the desire, and I've had some health issues, nothing major, thank God, but serious enough that having to be careful in the woods so I don't fall, especially if there's snow on the ground. I have a little trouble, but I still have it a little bit. I've got a lease here in Chippewa County. I lease some ground from my cousins who have more than enough farm ground, and big deer on quite a bit of it. It's 6 miles from my house, but as far as the wear and tear of being on the road and doing what I mean, even doing 4 or 6 or 3 hunts away from home, I don't know. I've kind of lost my desire to do that. Mm-hmm. And I used to look forward to it. I mean, there were times when we'd do back to back to back out of state hunts. We'd go and do 3 states and be gone for 21, 22 days.
That's a grind. Now that's hard.
Oh, yeah.
Even when you're younger.
And then come home and
it's too much.
Yeah. And then maybe come home and only be home for 2 or 3 days and turn around and go out and do another out of state hunt. I looked at I'm trying to think of when it was, what year it was. I think I did 13 or 14 hunts in 4 months.
Holy.
And you put the math to that, and it probably wasn't even full 4 months. It maybe made like 3.5. But it's what we had to do to make our show, make it a success, number one, but to just get enough footage to be able to have a show. And Jake was doing almost as many, my son.
Right.
And then we were getting a little bit of freelance stuff, but yeah, it was a grind, but when I was feeling good, when I was younger, I really liked it. I enjoyed doing it, and we're talking a lot about deer and this and that and how-to stuff. but I have met people and made friends with people that I would have no way ever met them or had the opportunity to become friends with them had I not been doing what I was doing, and that would have been tragic.
That's a good point, and that's the same thing with me in my career, and the fact that yeah, you do remember the hunts, especially the successful ones, but what's more important is the people that you meet along the way and those experiences, because you're talking about Oklahoma and Wyoming and South Dakota, some of the most beautiful, God-blessed country in the world. And to be able to not just deer hunt in it, just to sit back and reflect, how are these hills made? How are these rock crop formations carved out? Who was here before me, 300 years ago?
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff that I find just fascinating. And the memories, the memories and the friendships, the people you shared it with.
Right. And I'm a big history nut, and some of the areas, especially out west, I was always into the old west stuff. And, you get out there and I'm the same way. And interestingly, one of the ranches we hunted in northeast Wyoming, there were old Indian caves. We called them the Indian caves, mm-hmm. where I don't know what tribe of Indian it was, but it was on this one ranch we hunted. This ranch was like 4,000 or 5,000 acres. And just about every year that we'd hunt that ranch, I would have to go up into the hills, because we didn't hunt that part of the ranch. It really wasn't conducive to good whitetail hunting, that part. But we'd have to walk up there and just stand there. And there's times when I'd stand there or walk into those caves and just stand there and just to be in that environment and just wonder, what happened here?
Right.
How did this all shake out, and what tribe of Indians was this? And there was old drawings on the walls of these caves, and you just wondered what the significance was of those drawings, what they meant. It's amazing.
Totally amazing.
Amazing.
I had a list of other questions, but we're actually running right to the end here. Did not want to keep you on for longer than we have to. I know this is kind of just a little bit off the deer topic, but if anybody follows Greg on Instagram or Facebook, you must have some great fishing spots, man, because you're catching bass and crappies and walleyes and bluegills, and that's got to be a second love. I'm just guessing that.
Well, you talk about an individual who has been truly blessed. I mean, I grew up in an area where if you wanted to learn how to kill big deer, this was a pretty good area to be in, because, these deer have been pressured forever. If you can figure out a way how to kill big deer in this area, you can probably figure them out just about anywhere. So that was one part of the blessing. The other blessing was I live in northern Chippewa County, and this is no kidding, Dan. I can pull my boat out of the garage and take off and head north, and I can have you on a perfect walleye lake, a perfect crappie lake, a perfect bass lake, you name it. I can have you on the water in probably no more than 15 or 20 minutes. There are so many lakes in this area. Yeah, it's stupid, and I've learned how to fish a lot of them, and so I'm doubly blessed. I had my fishing in the summer and my deer hunting in the fall, and we're running coyotes in the winter with hounds here, and I mean it's a great area. It's just the luck of the draw, I guess. I just happened to be born and raised in the perfect setting for me.
God's country. I actually should have mentioned that about the coyote hunting. That looks like a lot of fun, and we could probably use a couple of you guys down here in Waupaca County and Portage County and Shawano County, and I'm sure the guys in the other states, Missouri and Iowa and Illinois, and especially in the southeast, their coyote problems are terrible. But coyote hunting looks like a blast.
We killed 50. We run hounds.
This
we killed
winter?
50, and
this winter.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we were done. Yeah, we were done. Oh, I gosh, it's got to be 2 or 3 weeks ago. Yeah, we were done like the first part of March. So we basically ran December, January, and February, and we had a fresh, I don't know, 3 to 4 inch snowfall here I think it was last week, early last week, and I took a drive around, and I am not kidding you. There is as many or more fresh coyote tracks now as there was before we started hunting. It's amazing how many coyotes we've taken out of certain blocks. And you go back the next day, and there's just as many coyotes in those blocks.
It's like taking a bucket of water out of the ocean. Then there's going to be more.
It is. I kid when I say that. Someday those things will be licking our skulls. Or we'll be a bunch of pile of bones, and there'll be a coyote, and there'll be a white-tailed buck watching him do it, and a cockroach will be calling out of the eye hole of that skull. So those are the three survivalist species, in my opinion.
That's actually spot on correct. Whitetail species is, I don't know how many millions of years old, and cockroaches, I don't think you'll ever exterminate them, and coyotes getting to be worse and worse. Well, on that note, we are almost right at the end there. Greg, thank you very much for joining us, my friend. I hope we can do this again sometime, because I know that you and I could sit down and talk for many hours, and especially one I want to do is we're going to talk about wolves someday, but it's not going to be today.
Yeah, that's fine. I love doing this, Dan. I'd be willing to do it anytime. We've talked for 45 minutes or whatever it is, and we haven't even scratched the surface. Thanks
again, Greg. Have a great day. Say hi to your family, and I hope everything goes well for you this spring.
All right, Dan. Thank you.
All right, for Greg Miller, I'm Dan Schmidt. Thanks for joining us on Deer Talk Now. Please join us again next time. And in the meantime, make sure you check out the video versions on our YouTube page. That's YouTube.com/DDH Online, or any podcast server that you have, or actually go to our website, deeranddeerhunting.com. We'll catch you next time.